So, that having said, our third and final session will explore how Korea and India can collaborate to enhance supply chain resilience and transparency amid global disruptions. Our first speaker is a fellow at the Observer Research Foundation Middle East. Please help me welcome Dr. Parul Bakshi.
Hi. So the last session, and I will try to keep it short and in time. So thank you so much. It's been a pleasure being here. So as you see from the title of my presentation, while the session is broadly on supply chains and resilience, my focus specifically would be on critical minerals pertaining to the energy transition, given the background that I work on and the fact that my research is specifically focused within the energy space. I think one key takeaway that we can gather so far, with the sessions that already happened, be it defense or tech and AI, is the fact that all of these sectors today entail critical minerals. And there are a few overlaps within the critical minerals that would be pertinent for the energy sector, except for, of course, the broader space is wider and goes beyond the energy sector. As I mentioned, the focus here would be on the critical energy transition minerals, which specifically means that which are the critical minerals that are broadly utilized throughout the energy sector space. Now, that could be in the sense of production of certain specific batteries, which is something that we commonly hear about, or the rare earth minerals, which is something that you might have heard in different geopolitical contexts recently in the news and gaining wide popularity, I would say. And just to bring this into context as to why am I focusing on these critical energy transition minerals, which is basically what the UN categorizes them as. That's not a terminology that I have come up with. It is known as the critical energy transition minerals, adhering to the specific minerals utilized for the critical energy transition or the decarbonization of the sector. So to give context, as you can see, an onshore wind plant needs 9 times more minerals and metals per unit of energy produced than a gas-fired plant. So just to give the enormity of the scale at which we're talking about the utilization of these minerals in the near future, or actually already in present. And also, if you compare that with an offshore wind plant, that would require 50% more than that number. And hence it brings into perspective the central challenge that we are looking at, which is to balance our decarbonization goals, which at present is, I would say, nearly universal, even though, of course, some key players have been taking a step back recently, but I feel like the global focus towards decarbonization, I would like to believe, stays intact. So that, alongside the strategic autonomy and resource access, which again is something that we've been talking about across sectors, not limited to the energy sector. And again, just to bring into perspective here of the specific minerals, of course, the list of critical minerals varies from country to country based on the kind of emphasis and importance that a specific nation might put not just on the energy sector, but in linkage to the larger industrial policy, to the economic security aspect. But this, again, the list that you see is a UNEP list of the categorization of specific minerals. Some are more commonly known, be it lithium in regard to lithium batteries, cobalt, copper, zinc, and there might be some names on screen which are not more commonly known, but do play a key role within the energy transition aspect that we look into. Again, just bringing into focus here the geopolitical context. So what are these supply risks and control points? Of course, there is a sense of centralization that exists, not just by nature, but across the value chain when you look at reprocessing, refining, and hence there is a structured imbalance, I would say, and concentration within certain geographies. However, when we are talking about resilience, my idea is to look beyond just one threat from a certain geopolitical player. I think it is about a wider change that is required in the perspective that we have towards supply value chains, and what is triggering that is something that I would like to talk about. one of the aspects is what consequences does such supply risk hold for us? So from a basic economic term, of course, there is volatility of prices. So if there are certain key players that can control or leverage the, the point of power that they hold, the first implication is on the prices, which of course then has a ripple impact across the value chain. The other is how this becomes a barrier to creating these new low carbon energy systems, which is our decarbonization goal, despite the fact that the pathway to that might vary from country to country, but the broader goal stays the same, and hence I would say this is a common consequence that we face. The other, what I find most interesting here is, of course, we know that as a result there has been growing economic protectionism, but if you see on screen, the restrictions on energy transition mineral exports is already 5 times more than what it was in 2009. So, and we're not talking about decades back, so that shows the exponential increase in, I do not like to use the term energy weaponization, but I think it just emphasizes the fact of what a key role these minerals play and how they're impacting not just energy security, but the economic security, industrial policy, and that's a trilateral that I would be talking about. And this is the reason that I was saying that when I look at resilience, I'm not talking just about an economic hedging aspect. We see the energy, minerals, climate triangle more and more commonly being spoken about. I think the overlap and the relationship across the sectors is being more vocalized. I think it has existed for a while, but nowadays we see more frequent usage of the interlinkage being spoken about. And of course, the idea here is for all 3 aspects to basically reinforce each other and not compete with each other, which of course is a easier thing to say than do. And this morning I was made aware of the fact that Korea actually merged their energy and environment ministry, which is a positive step forward if it can continue with the intention that it has been created with, because as we see that a number of countries, including India, where there have been instances of the energy and the environment ministry being at loggerheads because of different goals, or at least how they perceive those goals to be. So I think that could be a step in the right direction, and if South Korea is able to pull off that intended ambition, it could be a working model for other nations to look at. Just to give a brief overview of where the overlaps already exist between India and Korea here. So if you see, let's look at India to begin with. So we have the National Critical Minerals Mission and the PLI scheme. So not just looking at exploration, but also processing and manufacturing. And manufacturing is where the PLI scheme comes in. Also, again, the exploration aspect is not limited domestically, which again I think is a commonality that you find across nations when you look at their critical mineral strategies. The geology of the minerals is such that there are certain areas which have a higher concentration than domestic reserves. So I feel like this aspect has become a crucial step forward towards collaboration, and more countries are coming to terms with the new reality of reliance and resilience being a part of the game, instead of, Professor Pant in the morning was talking about, diversifying and not putting all eggs in one basket. And I think that's an aspect that can be applied, towards these supply chains as well, specifically pertaining to the critical minerals utilized within the energy sector. And hence what India is basically looking at is to become a processing and manufacturing hub based on the domestic reserves that it has. So exploring, building on the reserves that you already have, but also converting these raw minerals into value-added clean energy components. So the broader manufacturing goal that goes beyond just energy security perspective, but seeps into the economic security and industrial policy aspect of it. Now, in parallel, we see what's happening in Korea, and Korea also came up with recent policy initiatives, which included the Korea Minerals Resources Security Act, expanding on the role of KORES, and we have in parallel KABIL, which is Khanij Bidesh India Limited, basically both entities looking at exploring critical mineral reserves and value chains beyond their domestic borders. So I think when we look at the broader policy perspective, we see that there are already commonalities in the long-term vision of the two countries. And I would like to build on that, look to kind of expand on how I see the bilateral cooperation then going forward. So what I've tried to do is like not just mention where I see potential collaboration existing, but focusing also on what kind of strategic value would a certain aspect of this collaboration add. So of course, joint processing and refining hubs. The reason you also see a mention of Korean and Japanese firms committing offtake agreements there is that in the recent trilateral talks and also bilaterally the communication that India, Japan, and India, South Korea have been having, there has been at least a show of intent. I don't see on-ground takeoff of these projects yet, but I think that lays the ground, the fertile ground for the next step forward in this regard. Again, just highlighting the fact here that these joint processing and refining hubs are not just limited in India, but also the external projects that have been happening across Africa and Asia. Now looking at the finance and the risk sharing aspect, which becomes critical specifically when we talk about the private sector, which I think is a crucial pillar to look at, because of course the policy front enables and incentivizes certain projects, but at the end of the day, it would be the Indian and Korean private sector companies which would take this initiative forward. So hence looking at blended finance vehicles, which is something that is becoming extremely common when we talk about clean energy ecosystems across, specifically a lot of global south projects are utilizing such vehicles in order to minimize the risk that investors face and thereby promoting clean energy systems across these countries. So again, and I feel that, Chorus and Kabul joint investment windows, again, not just pertaining to projects in India or in South Korea, but at a global level, could be one aspect that can, push forward the intention of both these countries, which is to expand and make these supply chains more resilient. Also, of course, when we talk about critical minerals, specifically in the energy transition, technology is something that is a critical aspect of it. Some of you here might have heard about perovskite cells, which is a technology that the Japanese have been working on, intended to increase efficiency and reduce reliance on raw materials that are geographically concentrated or under the control of largely the Chinese. While it has not been commercially viable yet, a lot of research and progress has been made on the same. This is just to give an example of one nation looking at an alternative. But I think today throughout we've been talking about a lot of human capital and people-to-people collaboration and how the two countries can work on that. I would add that this can be another aspect on utilizing technology in order to diversify your value chain via technology. So of course, there are certain minerals that are critical, but can we find alternatives to that? Can we find other ways in order to change the existing technologies, such as the PV modules that we are heavily reliant on as of today? Also, another aspect that I would like to add here is from the mining perspective. So metallurgical engineers is something, again, that would be a key bridge in basically enhancing such a collaboration. We have Professor Ravindran from IIT, and IIT is a premier engineering institute in India. I'm speaking at the Seoul National University, which again is a premier institute in South Korea. So talking and looking at such collaborations, enhanced interactions on the technology R&D perspective that I said, bridging the engineering human capital that exists in the two countries, and basically building on the foundations of that is something that I think could be looked at. And of course, we talk about standards and data transparency. ESG is something that we were talking about last night, and ESG governance is something that exists across both the countries. As the dialogue and discussion about these critical minerals has gained pace and perspective. I think a lot of environmental aspect of the mining, of the utilization, of the environmental cost in using these, because of course we're trying to build a clean energy system, but if the process that we are going through is not enabling environmental growth or being environmentally friendly, then it raises questions as to, is that the value chain that we want to create? So hence, this is where the ESG aspect of the ongoing projects that the two countries embark upon, as well as what they could in future embark upon, comes into play. And I feel that could be another aspect to look at. Also, I would briefly touch upon the shared mineral market early warning system. This is actually something that the Korean policy already talks about. So I feel like instead of looking at it as a unilateral or even a bilateral approach, we talk about like-minded countries and the broader Indo-Pacific and some of the common challenges that countries within the region are facing. So I feel this could be another aspect on when we are putting forth resilient supply chains, how can we leverage information that each other or the other partner might have to kind of help prepare the others for any kind of volatile prices, geopolitical risks, changes in production, manufacturing that we can already utilize to feed into like an early warning system so that everybody is better prepared. So of course, stockpiling is one aspect of it, but stockpiling also comes with its certain challenges and limitations. So, basically broadening our risk management strategies beyond just stockpiling of these critical minerals. Now, I would like to take a few minutes to basically go beyond the bilateral relationship. I know we've been specifically focusing on India and Korea here, but I also feel that given the interconnectedness of the topic that I'm talking about, I would like for both the countries to utilize their multilateralism approach. I think both India and South Korea have the vantage point of having a decently good bilateral relationships across the globe, not just with each other. And we are part of a lot of multilateral forums that are already engaging in these conversations. So how can this bilateral cooperation then be a stepping stone towards multilateralism? And I like to term it the strategic minerals diplomacy. Basically, if you want to build a system which is based on trust, transparency, and technology, which I feel are the three aspects that I've been trying to highlight via my previous slides, and I think bilaterally the two countries are already there in their approach. So then it is a matter of then taking that approach to other existing multilateral platforms so that we can achieve the common goal that we have, which is towards resilience. And also I want to highlight here that I think oftentimes the narrative gets shifted from interdependence to independence. How can we be self-sufficient in this approach? How can we be self-reliant on this approach? And while that approach is required in certain aspects, when we're talking about critical mineral supply value chain for energy transition, I think it is more about building a trusted interdependence, because we do not want a competition to evolve towards these critical minerals, but we want more of a cooperation to evolve when we're talking about these minerals, and that is the idea of trusted interdependence here. So just to quickly conclude a few points, I think energy security more and more is now being associated to what we call the new economic security, and critical minerals form part of a key foundation of that narrative. Also, as I mentioned, I don't see it as just, so when we talk about strategic autonomy, it is not just about self-reliance, but also how do you build these trusted interdependencies with countries that you have shared value systems with, and I see India and South Korea as an example of that. Also, going beyond the buyer-supplier dynamics and focusing more on creating these secure mineral ecosystems beyond our geographical borders. And I like the aspect that resilience was part of the session theme, and that's why I wanted to bring this in, that I don't see resilience as a mere reaction to what's happening geopolitically in the world today, but more of a design principle that we are trying to integrate at every stage of this process. And also when we speak of resilience, it should not be equivalent to inefficiency, which can be created via the competitive approach that I was talking about. Instead, if we base it on strategic flexibility and risk visibility, so know where those risks lie and how can we be better prepared for at least those known points. Of course, there's an aspect of unknown risk mitigation, which becomes more harder to curtail, but I feel like resilience in that sense is a broader spectrum to look at, which inculcates resilience from this perspective. And as why I feel India and South Korea can be good countries for this narrative or this discourse to be taken forward at a multilateral approach is because of the transparency frameworks and joint investment models that the two can bilaterally work upon, which can be a model set up for other bilateral relationships as well as broader multilateral engagements in the near future. And I hope I stayed within time, so thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bakshi. And now, please help me welcome our last speaker of the day, Dr. Sung-Hoon Chung, a senior fellow at the Korean Development Institute.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me today. It's a great pleasure to present what I have been thinking about, global supply chain and cooperation between Korea and India, and I think it's a great opportunity to present my idea. But this is my own idea, so might be biased a little bit. Please take that into account. So I would like to start my discussion with why we actually need a collaboration with each other. Although I can imagine that this discussion is already discussed in the morning as well as previous session. But we're experiencing in a world where global order is changing. The world is changing from unipolar to multipolar world. So after post-World War II, the United States hegemony enabled global integration, so-called Pax Americana. But in 2000s and 2010s, China's rise challenged this unipolar system, and we are now in 2020s experiencing the acceleration of transition to the multipolar competition. And the reason why this multipolar world is connected, the international trade, is actually globalization is a in many part driven by hegemony. So I would call it a hegemonic globalization, and this hegemonic globalization is under stress now. In a unipolar era, think about like alignment with a hegemon reduces the transaction cost. The most representative example would be WTO, or World Trade System, which was initiated in 1995. So most trading countries joined the WTO and applied so-called most favored nation rule. And 2001, China joined this WTO system as well, and since then, China's export to the world was exploded. Multilateral rules and policy convergence enable this kind of trade expansion under the WTO system. But rising powers, in this case China, creates alternative alignment options. Why don't we join these alternative alignment options? And this could invoke a fragmentation. And also global value chains. So we are under threat to choose a block choice, either perhaps the existing hegemony or new entrant hegemony. And this is not just narrative. If you look at the statistics here, it shows the global power index. back in 19th centuries, United Kingdom was the absolute power. But after the World War II, the United States took the hegemony, and then the gap between the first power and second power was great. But as you can see, around 2000s, China start rise. And then this shows the gap between the first power and second power. As you can see, right now, the gap between the first power, which is the United States, and second power is China, has been reduced significantly, as low as interwar period or early 20th century. So in this kind of narrowed power gap, we can definitely expect a fragmented world. And if you look at this one, in panel A, we see that who is the main treaty partners. In 1990s, most countries have more treaty to the United States, but in 2010 and 2019 period, most countries, including Korea and India, has more treaty with China than the United States. So what that means is that we're more aligned to China, starting more aligned to China compared to the United States recently. So global supply chains, once designed for efficiency, now face unprecedented challenges under these fragmentation threats. I think global supply chain disruption come from three major shocks. It has been coming from three major shocks. I think the initial shock was a climate-related supply shocks, especially 2011 Great East Japan earthquake. But even we suffered from these big shocks, we didn't change our supply chain structure that much, because it's we thought it's a rare event, and by responding these shocks by more stockpiling or additional inventories and etc. So we didn't really change our supply chain structures. And then we experienced the pandemic-induced disruptions. But these things, both of them are, I think, it's a relatively rare event. Most ongoing and persistent and the most important shock is the geopolitical tensions and bloc formation, which we are now suffering. So in this multipolar era, other countries except China and the United States must balance the three imperatives. The first thing is diversifying dependency to reduce concentration risk. The second one is maintaining this existing system, open rule-based trade and bloc pressures, amid in the bloc pressures. And then the third, the building adaptive resilient network through collaboration. That's why we need to collaborate with each other. The key insight is, the supply, when we talk about global supply chain, the resilience is now inseparable from the geopolitical strategy. We actually, our dependence on these two hegemony is increasing over time. For Korea, import from China is increased from around 16% in 2011 to more than the 22% now. India is suffering a similar pattern. And export to United States is increasing for both countries. Now think about how these two countries, China and the United States, how they utilize this over reliance. For China, for example, it utilizes rare earth materials for their economic statecraft. And then US, of course, they utilize import tariff. Now, for Korea, this is only a Korean perspective. Korea have been invested a lot in China, and we had a lot of production facility in China. But now we need an alternative, and India is a key beneficiary of this supply chain diversification. We call it China plus one, and India is mostly regarded as the one. Now, India has a big strength, unique strength. I don't even need to explain about these things. But you know, have a massive domestic market and cost-competitive manufacturing, young workforce, world-class IT talent, etc. And importantly, India is a democratic country and relatively stable geopolitical status. And it also commit to the open trade, although sometimes India shows some protectionism signal. But I believe it basically supports the open trade. And India is a very strategically important country for Indo-Pacific position. So the first imperative, I think, diversifying dependencies, as I showed in the chart in the previous slide, Korea is over-concentrated on China for inputs and markets. We need to diversify. India also trying to reduce dependence on China, as far as I know. So India has a manufacturing scale, cost competitiveness. For Korea, India is absolutely a viable alternative. So this partnership enables geographic diversification for both countries, I think. Second imperative, we have to maintain our open trade system. Both faces pressure to choose rigid blocks, and both countries committed to rule-based multilateral trade order so that we can have a partnership that provides a strategic hedging. Third one, I think this is quite important one, building an adaptive network. So anyway, we have to reconfigure our supply chain system, and what is the critical factors to rebuild our supply chain system? I think is one of the most important thing is, of course, manufacturing capacity, but also it's a digital technology is very important. So physical supply chain is important, but you know, digital supply chain is also as important as the physical chain. So Korea has a advanced technology ICT leadership. India, software excellence, very good talented IT workers. So these combination can quickly reconfigure the global supply chain system, I believe. We are progressively in a mood of cooperation. So for example, a special strategic partnership started in 2015. We have established this framework for deepening cooperation. And around 10 years later, which was last year, we had a 10th Korea-India Joint Commission, and we talked about how do we cooperate in sectors like semiconductors or green hydrogens. And we agreed that the supply chain resilience was a priority area, and then we also agreed to cooperate in critical technologies. And also, we had a SEPA, Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement, which is basically a free trade agreement, which started in 2010. But I don't think it induces much deeper trade between these two countries. So we need to upgrade this negotiation. And as far as I know, negotiation is ongoing now. And this upgraded negotiation, we are targeting 50 billion bilateral trade by 2030, which is twice as much as now. I think we need first institutional framework. For example, we could establish a Korea-India supply chain working group, and this is a ministerial level. we can have a fast-track SEPA enhancement institution or joint investment facility for strategic sectors. For critical materials, as you explained very well, Korea don't have natural resources actually. So, but India have abundant natural resources. So we could join resource development, both in India or in even third countries. We can also share our technology and capacity, right? So Korea has a, processing technology in Korea is the world best. Combining that with India's scale could create a scale economy. And as I mentioned, innovation and production network, digital supply chain infrastructure is very important, which we can do together, and we can establish joint R&D centers for the new technologies. Now I noticed this key some constraint from Korea's perspective. This is only Korea's perspectives. So the key constraint is regulatory fragmentation in India. So different states have different rules and laws, especially investment rules, taxes, labor laws. So and also I heard that it's quite hard to acquire land in India. That's another problem. The second one is trade barriers, uncertainty. Trust is very important, as mentioned earlier. So, but then sometimes India shows protectionist signals. Sometimes they changes duty all of a sudden, inconsistent custom enforcement, etc. And also infrastructure gaps, things like a port congestion, or it has a high logistics cost. For example, it takes around 11 to 14% of GDP compared to the advanced country, which is about 7 to 8% of GDP. So not only just international trade, intranational trade cost is a bit expensive in India. But I believe India's policy framework is clear and strong. Although these challenges exist, India has well-articulated government vision and policy goals, and they provided, already supply chain policy framework, including production-linked incentives for 14 broad sectors, and Prime Minister Modi initiated self-reliant India, which reduces import dependence. And they made an agreement with Japan and Australia for supply chain resilience initiative. So they have a strong supply chain policy framework. They showed a willingness. So, and actually they demonstrated some success, for example, in the smartphone industries. So I think with cooperation, I think we can overcome this constraint. I provided a bit of examples of how can we overcome this constraint. One example could be establishing a joint investment and risk-sharing platforms. So we could raise a fund, and the fund was linked to Korea Exim Bank, EDCF. EDCF is concessional loan program in Korea. And then Exim Bank of India, and then we can operate the fund for the strategic sectors. And then we start, although heterogeneous state rules, but we can apply this pilot program, start with 2 or 3 stable states, and use co-located supplier clusters especially Korean firms in India. And we can also, Korea has a couple of export promotion agencies like KOTRA, K-Sure, Korea Export-Import Bank. And with collaboration with the export promotion agency, we could build a unified framework. Along with, we have the firms invested in India can ask their request through the unified platforms, like I call it the India desk. So, and also, other things, technology and standards can be made. But this is an example. So how do we actually realistically collaborate with each other? I would also, you also mentioned bilateral and multilateral partnership is important. I also want to emphasize both partnership is quite important. So as an example of a bilateral partnership, maybe green hydrogen is a good example. Korea has a technology of the world best technology of fuel cell manufacturing and hydrogen vehicle technology. And India has a big, renewable energy capacity and production capacity. And these two countries, through the joint R&D, technology transfer, and co-investment in facilities, we can produce green hydrogen in India, and Korea maybe provide a storage technology to India, and we can successfully store and apply to, H2 vehicles or industrial use or other things. So this can create a simple value chains from production, storage to the application. So I think it's a good example. And I noticed that this is already discussed in the Korea-India Joint Commission last year. We can go further to the multilateral engagement. So what I would like to suggest is a multi-node production network, so-called. This is, I mentioned that, geopolitical strategy is very important. So think about which countries are located between Korea and India. There is Taiwan and ASEAN countries, Hong Kong or Singapore, which are very specialized in the finance, and some of the East Asian countries are specialized in mass productions. Taiwan is high technology. So we already have a bunch of countries. We ourselves can build a very successful global value chain. So beyond bilateral ties, Korea, the distance between Korea and India is a little bit not too short, right? Actually, not too short. But by building a multi-node, in between these two countries, like Taiwan and ASEAN countries, the physical distance getting narrowed, and we can leverage these intermediate hubs, right? So we can reduce the single country concentration risk, of course. So this is an example of a multi-node network system. I come up with a biopharmaceutical industry. Korea has a good capacity of R&D, and Singapore, they can perform clinical trials. And then during the producing a biopharmaceutical, we can utilize Vietnam's or Thailand's capacity for formulation or fill finish. And then, India is very good at mass production of these biopharmaceuticals. So this kind of multi-node network can be a good example for our multilateral collaboration, I think. If we can go a little bit more further, we can get into the, in the Pacific architectures like IPAF or supply chain resilience initiative. Although now India, Japan, Australia framework, but absolutely Korea can join the framework, Quad system and sectoral reliance as well. The key is basically we should have a more common ground and more alignment through the common framework. And then through the common framework, we can share supply chain data and which is interoperable. So, and not only that, we can share also best practices for resilience and transparency. Right. Now, so Indo-Pacific area has lots of treaty with each other. So, for example, Korea has traditional U.S. ally, and India, is Quad, included in Quad. And then there's an ASEAN, and we can see the IPAF, RCEP, and CPTPP. So, but the only overlap between Korea and India is right now is IPAF. Maybe we can join together to CPTPP, which I think is great. It can create a great trade diversification, and then set of common rules. So that may be one way to raise more alignment between India and South Korea. So my conclusion is, although we are under threat of fragmented global value chain because of the two hegemony, it could also create opportunity for other medium power countries like Korea and India. And Korea and India has a natural fit. I strongly believe we have a complementary strength. And we can build resilient supply chains. So right now, it's time to act. So yeah, that's my humble opinion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now, our third and final session will be moderated by Professor Jong-hee Park from SNU's Department of Political Science and International Relations and the head of the Institute for Future Strategies Economic Security Cluster.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. So I'm very pleased to be in the chair of the important discussion of mineral supply chain. And Dr. Baxi gave a really good layout to think about this mineral energy security in the context of climate change and energy transition. And Dr. Jung, who's a specialist in global value chain and economic security, gave a really interesting suggestions and fact-finding in this area and examples of possible cooperation, institutional framework, and industrial kind of a possibility. So I'm very excited to continue this conversation, and I want to encourage everybody to join this discussion because it's the last chance. Oh, we have another discussion, general discussion. But so supply chain is such an important issue, and South Korea and India are facing a similar problem and the similar challenges, and we can cooperate in this area. However, I want to start kind of from the reminder that even though there are a lot of possibility and geographical kind of a relative proximity between these two countries, there has been not much cooperation between two countries. So think about why. Why we don't pay that much attention to India from Korea's perspective compared to China or Vietnam or other Asian countries. And from India's perspective, why there was not much kind of attention or kind of a policy kind of direction toward South Korea compared to Japan or other countries. So, I think it's not talking about, anybody's problem, but about what is kind of natural barrier between these two countries' cooperation and how can we overcome these kind of natural barrier has been existed for a long time. From that perspective, I think both two presenters provide a lot of possibility policy cooperation, institutional participation, and industrial partnership and investment possibility. However, I want to move the focus to from the perspective of government and the kind of the think tank to the perspective of the individual firm. So I think it's actually firm's decision to go to some place and build a factory, find the labor force and hire them and run the factory. So think about the China rush from the Korea perspective was started by a couple of firms like Samsung, Samsung's Xi'an factory, then the Flash factory, 7 billion investment. It turns out very successful. So other firms follow that. So Samsung's Xi'an factory was considered as like a benchmark or model case. So other Korean companies realized that, oh, investment in China is not just possible, but it's very, very promising. And Samsung was very successful. I can do the same, something like that. And the investment in Vietnam is the same thing. Like Vietnam, Samsung's investment and Daewoo's investment in Hanoi, Taegwang's investment in Ho Chi Minh turns out very successful. So other firms in Korea find the opportunity there and start a venture. So from the firm's perspective, for the common question, what is the kind of the barrier or opportunity to the investment in India, or Indian firm's perspective, what is the opportunity or kind of barrier in thinking about joint venture or partnership or long-term kind of a supplier, relationship with the Korean firm? And also to the question to Professor Dr. Jung, from the Korean firm's perspective, I think there are certain firms that are reluctant to go beyond Vietnam or certain countries. So they talk about infrastructure, like they talk about the different culture and the labor force maintenance problem or wage increase problem, all these problems. And so given that kind of barriers, what kind of area, the sector or industry, you mentioned the biofarm, and it will be kind of very effective in terms of providing like a role model or benchmark to other firms to follow in cooperation between Korea and India. So that's my general question. So it's very ambiguous and broad. You can choose any part of the story, but that's my question. And this is my end of the question. I can take up other questions after the brief reply from both sides. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the question. I think at the outset, I would say I completely agree with what you mentioned, and that's one of the reasons that even during my presentation, I spoke about the, how like the last mile is often covered by the private sector, and that is what any kind of policy discussion should be at least aiming towards. Of course, a policy overlap and shared vision is something that is a requirement, which I think the two countries already have. So I would say we foundationally, when we're talking about critical energy transition minerals, we're halfway there. It's more about on-ground implementation. I think, again, critical energy transition minerals offer a new fertile ground for this bilateral cooperation to materialize via the private sector. The reason being, of course, the increased pace and focus on the sector, given the recent developments globally. And I think in this regard, I wanted to highlight the fact because we also spoke briefly about custom duties. So India actually a few months back has removed basic custom duties on 25 minerals. We have opened FDI via automated route for exploration of minerals. So there is, from the policy side, I think there is a lot of interest stemming from India wanting more collaborations and partnerships across the globe. And I think this is an opportune time for both the countries to look at this specific sector in order to go beyond whatever challenges have hindered them previously to not expand on this cooperation. I do agree with some of the barriers that were highlighted during your presentation, and I think a good starting point would be from the Indian side to be aware of what specific challenges Korean private sector faces when trying to invest and work with India. And also, I think from the economics of it is basically what I feel drives the private sector. So if we're able to showcase the potential, so of course, theoretically, we know of the huge market, but as you mentioned, it takes one good private sector model example to materialize for other firms to follow. And I think throughout the day we've spoken multiple times about the affinity that the two countries have, the soft part, the K-dramas. So the openness towards the country already exists. It's a matter of how we can help it materialize with one project. And again, I feel that critical energy transition minerals can be a good opportunity, not just bilaterally, so it could also, if we can work together towards a third country. You spoke about the the technology that Korea has when it comes to processing, and India has been geologically looking at what minerals do they have. They want to, of course, the first step would be looking at exploration and mining, but there are already projects that India is going ahead as JVs across Africa, looking at processing technology. So there's a lot of work that I feel both the countries are doing, probably not still together, but in different aspects. So if we can bring in that platform for just a conversation to begin, we'll realize that there are already so many overlaps, and hence that could probably push forth the private sector to go ahead and start even with one successful projects, which could then create a positive ripple effect.
Thank you for the question. So I also actually considered about like why Korea and India hasn't been much cooperate with each other. So when I prepared this presentation, I thought about this question actually. So my personal conclusion was, although I'm not a firm owner in Korea, from Korean perspective, I could say the first simple reason is we had a China for a long time. So China is closer to Korea. China is bigger market and well-established institution in terms of business. So we had a China, so that's why we invested a bit more, much more than we expected, but in China, and we had that causes over-reliance in China nowadays. But as we all know, the situation is changed recently, especially for the last couple of years. So we need we start realizing that we need alternative other than China. As I mentioned, the China +1, and India is. We started thinking about India. That's the one simple reason, and then second reason I think as institutional issues. India is for Korean firms, it's less business friendly compared to other East Asian countries and China. And also, as I mentioned, the rules are fragmented and heterogeneous across different states. So that it's as I mentioned, the intra-national trade cost is a bit expensive. Once although you have located your production facility in one state, it's a bit expensive to deliver your product to other states. So that's why I guess some firms are hesitating to invest in in India. And then last reason I think is deep in mind, there's a trust issue actually. can we trust with each other? But I think this issue can be overcome by more trade, just more practice and more sharing, and not only just the manufactured goods, but services, as you mentioned, the culture, and soft power. We get together. Trust is naturally will be built. I think so. I think in that sense, we are looking for alternative to China, and India, as I introduced in the presentation, showed a strong, well-articulated regulatory framework for the manufacturing within India, and then trust we can build together. So I think the future is promising.
Okay, so I'm going to collect the question, the first round. 2 questions from the audience about the supply chain and the mineral energy security issue. Okay. Oh, yeah, please.
Regarding the supply of critical minerals, we mostly talk about the refining capacity or building a resilient supply chain, but I feel that the biggest problem comes right now is the availability, because they're found in such small quantities, in such large volumes of other more abundant minerals, and getting those minerals out of the earth is highly polluting, and we don't know how they are scattered across the earth and where they are scattered across the earth. Sometimes those minerals are under heavily forested areas and where endangered species live. So, I mean, your presentation didn't address that. You did mention that it needs to be sustainable, but how we are planning to deal with the problem that the earth mineral element distribution is not as per our political will. That is one of the questions. I actually have a comment on the other presentation. You have mentioned the bottlenecks from the Indian perspective, Korean perspective, and I agree with all of them. But since you mentioned several times that was a Korean perspective, I do want to wish to add the Indian perspective, which is that out of the 25 billion, I'm not the trade expert in the mission, so my figures might be a little bit dated. About $25 billion trade between the two countries. 14 billion is export from Korea, and only 7 billion is import from India. So Korea is exporting twice as much. So I'm just saying, it comes when you see the relationship, it's definitely in favor of Korea. Hyundai recently had an IPO, not recently, last year now, the largest IPO in the history of the Indian stock market, and they made a killing. There are 700 Korean firms operating in India. All of them are making profit, as per my last knowledge. There are only about 70, 80 Indian firms in Korea. All of them are making losses. I mean, you might find an exception, but I'm giving you the broad outlines. So when you talk about, taxation and regulatory barriers, I really feel that Korean firms have made it. Ask Samsung, ask Kia, ask Hyundai, ask LG. They are all making a killing in India. So I really feel that they have cracked the Indian market. I feel that the challenges that lie are in joint work. As a marketplace, Korean firms have discovered India long back, but as a partner is where where the gap is. That to look at India as a partner country, and yes, I totally agree with you that geography, unfortunately, is the most limiting factor in developing bilateral relations. The ones who are near us, we have to deal with them. Whether good, bad, whatever, high fences make good neighbors or whatever it is. So I feel that is one of the things. Then in terms of high duty, I mean, duty shocks, I think somebody else has the monopoly over it, but I'm just mentioning that basmati rice has 700% import duty in Korea. So a bag of 100 rupee basmati rice would be 800 rupees in Korea. So I'm just saying that import duties are on both sides. For example, CEPA negotiations you mentioned. Indians are not I mean, it's a red line for the Koreans that they will not give Indians native English language speaker recognition. It's just a red line. So if I were to apply for a job in Korea, I would have to pass the TOEFL exam or whichever other criteria. So I'm just saying that barriers exist on both sides. I really feel that at the policy level, everybody is recognizing that India is a reliable partner. But at the functional level, like when we go to the Ministry of Justice, even when ministries have given the letter of invitation, we fail to get visas. Like 80 or 90% of our visas are rejected, despite the fact they're coming for official business invited by Korean government. So I feel that the challenges are, whatever you have mentioned, I've agreed with all of them. All I'm saying is there are other aspects of it that we are not looking at, that were not mentioned here, which I thought was very pertinent if you want to have an overall understanding of these issues. So sorry for taking up so much time, but thank you for listening.
No, I think that's very helpful. So I think that this kind of conversation is really important to have this, dialogue more productive and future oriented. Yeah, go ahead.
Since we don't have question askers, I'll use that opportunity. So in your slide, you had talked about the AI supply chain. Do we have an understanding of what the AI supply chain really means? Because I know there's a lot of confusion. It's not just a question of supplying hardware. There is so much, data, so much data work that forms part of the supply chain. So, and some of it is very easy to span borders, and in other cases, it's not. Right? Especially when you're talking about hardware and chips actually crossing borders. But when you talk about software and data work, not just data, but data work also crossing borders, that's much easier. So do we have a better characterization of what the AI supply chain is? Do we talk about all aspects of it when we talk about AI supply chain?
Thank you for the question. I think I would say there's a two-pronged approach here. One is about the places that the mining is already happening. So say, for example, India has also, JV'd with a number of countries, and there are companies working across Africa. Within India as well, there is a joint project in Andhra Pradesh between India and Japan where India is working. So one approach is where there is existing mining going on, how do we make that more environmentally friendly? And I think that aspect is still relatively easier, not easy, but relatively easier because there is an existing ecosystem. It is about focusing on enhanced sustainability of the process of mining and what mining approach is being utilized. The second aspect is what you highlighted, which is that there are certain geological studies that are being conducted. One of the recent big discoveries was the J&K lithium deposits, which got a lot of media traction within India and also globally because of the increased lithium demand, specifically stemming from the lithium-ion batteries. But I was engaging with one of the stakeholders from GSI following that, and what I understood was basically the challenge that you highlighted, that we do not know the exact deposits. It is in a zone which is environmentally conserved, so it falls under forested area, at least some part of it, and also the technological aspect. So again, exploration, and that's one of the reasons I feel like within the National Critical Mineral Mission, that's an aspect that has been spoken about, which is domestic exploration. So to begin with, technologically utilizing advancements in order to see how much we can gauge the exact amount of reserves. And then again, as you said, that their geographical distribution of these minerals is not in our power and capacity to change. But again, then that policy decision making of what mineral is available, in what capacity, do we have the technology, can we balance it with the environmental sustainability, which is where the ESG component of a project comes into play. I think all needs to be balanced in order to take that step forward is what I would say.
Yeah, so that we have a great commitment to finish 5. So very briefly, like a 2 minute. Yeah, yes.
So that we can have a mutual benefit. So actually, in the previous session, discussed about like Korean culture populated in India, but Korea, we're not actually very familiar with Indian culture, sort of things. So Korea, we need to be more open for the not only just manufacturing goods and but also services and culture things. And given that being said, I mean, it's true that bilateral trade volume is although 25 billion, but Korea export much more than India, right? But that trade deficit is largely driven by foreign direct investment with Korean firms located in India. So we provide intermediate goods to India. We have to supply some of those, intermediate goods. That's why I think we export more than India export to Korea. Now, and then regarding the second question, I may mispresented the concept of digital supply chain. What I meant was that supply chain should be equipped with digital technology. And then in that sense, AI, of course, AI technology involved in those systems. So yes, that's what I meant.
We found a very interesting point to discuss more down the road. So it's a very nice transition to general discussion. So I just heard from there's no break between this session and general discussion. So I'm going to move the mic to the moderator. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much to the moderator and to the presenters for their wonderful work. It is now time for general discussions, and we will keep this very short and brief. Participants are welcome to share reflections on today's themes and suggest directions for future Korea-India collaboration. When asking a question or raising a point, I ask that you kindly state your name and affiliation. So do we have any questions or comments from the floor?
Since the morning, I think we have had 3 sets of discussions on 3 different topics, but I do think that there is an underlying theme here, and I think it was captured by the last speaker. In a sense, saying that there is a lack of understanding, I think, on both sides. While we exult over the fact that K-pop, K-dramas, beauty products are very popular in India, I think the level of engagement is a function of, at the end of the day, the level of popular engagement, people-to-people engagement that you see between nations. And I think the one of the reasons why Korea-China relations could emerge as almost the last frontier in economic relationship was because of the certain affinity between 2 cultures, between 2 peoples, between 2 nations. And I think that perhaps needs to be nurtured from both sides. And I would encourage both the governments to do more on that front, because there is a real problem. India is either seen as very, there is a caricature of India in maybe here, and there is a caricature of Korea in India. Because we see so many K-dramas, we believe, that all Koreans are like this. And similarly, maybe the perception here is that India is only Tagore, Nehru, and Tagore, Gandhi, and Vivekanand. Maybe so I think India has changed rapidly. Korea is changing rapidly, and unless we are able to have a conversation on that change, a regular conversation, a sustained conversation, it becomes very difficult. I think one of the academic exchanges, for example, are also fairly limited. I do not see. It's a shame that Korea's biggest university is not doing more on India. It's a shame that India's biggest universities are not doing more on Korea, but that's the reality of the day, and that we do not prioritize each other. So at the end of the day, we have episodic relationship. Hyundai, LG, Samsung. This is not relationship. This is an economic, an economic firm making a profit in a market. And that will not give you the dividends that you would like, because ultimately when we talk of, look, there is a real challenge that we want to diversify away from China's dependence. Now that diversification is not going to happen overnight for various reasons, but one of the reasons is that there is no prior affinity between two nations. And so howsoever hard officials will try, they will always falter. So I think we need to focus more at this level where we are bringing more youngsters together, more thinkers and academics together. Not only because I like to visit Korea more, but I would like to visit Korea more. But I think many of our youngsters from both sides would benefit from looking, from India, from India's vantage point beyond Japan and China, what is happening in Korea, and from Korea's vantage point beyond China and maybe Japan, what is happening in India and how India is changing. I think those are there. Perhaps we can try to put more sustained effort. I was just having a conversation with her colleague, with Mr. Kumar, and I said, are there any Bollywood films that are shot here? But apparently not. Not many. The private entertainment, the entertainment sector in India has not really captured this market. Maybe they are scared of Korean entertainment sector as well. But I think once you start moving beyond a certain threshold, certain advantages automatically accrue to you, which I think we need to start thinking in terms of how we can go beyond this. And I think academic institutions have a very important role to play. So I wish there are more fellowships, scholarships in Korea, and there are more in India for that matter. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. Can we have one more comment or question? And then, yes?
I'm Hyun-Chul Meng, Asia Center. I am Bangalore professor for 6 years, and I got my PhD in Hong Kong anyway. So yeah, mom told me, so we need to understand each other more. But definitely here in Korea, we have huge fans of Bollywood movie, and also some Korean people are trying to understand India. So I really like the title of today's symposium, dialogue. So we need dialogue. So even though the level of dialogue is not that high, but remember there are some people who try to best to interact these two countries and try to start dialogue. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now, thank you to everyone for your contributions and active engagement. We will now have the vote of thanks from the Deputy Director of the Institute for Future Strategy, Professor In-Joo Son. Please help me welcome.
I think everyone's waiting for this. This is almost the end of all long event. So as we come to the close of this ROK Indo Strategic Dialogue Symposium, I would like to extend my deep thanks to everyone who made today's event so meaningful and forward-looking. What has emerged from this rich exchange and dialogue today is a simple but powerful insight. India and South Korea are no longer just participants in the Indo-Pacific order. We are architecture of it. We are co-architecture of Indo-Pacific security, economic, and technology orders. So our ability and potential to blend the technology and innovation and democratic value give us a credibility and shape a more stable and open and inclusive region. On behalf of the Institute for Future Strategy, I would like to express my heartfelt appreciation to Embassy of India and ORF and IIT joining us this endeavor. And my sincere thanks also goes to all our panelists and moderators and participants. And a special word of appreciation to the hardworking IFS admin staff, and also research fellows, and especially Mr. Min-Hee Jo, Jo Min-Hee, for their quiet and very efficient in the behind the scenes. As we wrap up, let's carry forward today's conversation into a more concrete cooperation in research and policy dialogue and joint innovation, so that the Korea-India partnership continue to grow, not only in a strategy, but also in spirit, in heart and mind. Thank you once again for your time and your insight and your friendship. And we look forward to welcoming you back to Seoul, or we meet again in New Delhi soon. Thank you and good evening. Bye-bye.
So This concludes our symposium. A special thank you to our translators for their wonderful work, and have a terrific evening. Thank you very much.